And this morning we're starting a new sin. We're going to discuss this one, and it is envy. But actually, to talk about envy, the way that we're going to do this is we're going to start out by asking a what would seem to be unrelated question. Are adultery and fornication the same thing? Okay, 1 no, 2 no's, 3 no's. Okay, let's look at what the Bible says, and there's going to be a point to this. This isn't just unrelated. Here we go. In John 8:41, now, a lot of people would just go ahead and say, yeah, they're the same thing. In John 8:41, he says, you do the deeds of your father. Then said they to him, we be not born of fornication. So one note that we have made before for people who they like to quibble about things, they like to, I would say, really honestly, they're swallowing, straining at a gnat to swallow a camel. You have the clear teachings in the Bible about fornication, and somebody says, well, what is fornication really? Well, when you get John 8:41, they said, we be not born of fornication, so we can clearly understand if you're not married, it's a man and a woman making a baby, and we know how that takes place. And it's someone would say, oh, so you're not fornicating unless a baby is actually conceived? No, we're talking about the act to make the baby. But look at John 8:4. They say unto him, Master, this woman was taken in adultery in the very act. And the point that we've made about this context, or this text in of itself, is we know that they were not saying, we caught this woman in the middle of a marriage ceremony. Right? They are saying, in the sense of what would be Deuteronomy, they're going to be lying together. That's what the text of Deuteronomy 22:25 says. So we got the answers. No, they're not the same thing, but they actually do involve the same act. So what's the difference between the two? Fornication and adultery, what's the difference?
One of them is going to occur in the context where at least one party is actually committed to a marriage.
Okay. So
somebody stepping beyond their marriage to engage in a sexual act elsewhere.
Okay. So John 8:41, that could just be two unmarried people. John 8:41 really could be someone who takes sexual action with someone who is married. For them, it would still just be fornication. But in John 8:4, what Ian said is somebody is inside of a marriage bond. So it does involve sexual activity, but there's just one little difference, and we say little, but there's one difference between the two is you're married, you're not married. Does it involve the same act? Yes, it involves the same act, but there's just that detail, you're married, you're not married. James.
1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 38, 39, 40.
About the widow's marrying, that's where that is. Okay, now let's look at this. Before we move on, so for the last 2 of my classes, we talked about covetousness, and today we're talking about envy. Would you say there is any difference between covetousness and envy?
Envy is what they want.
Well, we looked at coveting and we said it's what they want. That's how Joshua 7 worked. Achan said, I saw it, I wanted it, and then I took it. So what would be the difference in your mind between coveting and envy? So let's look at this as you're thinking of how you would like to communicate it. Well, we looked at it before, and we're not going to get too deep in it, but we asked the question, we did coveting. We said, is all types of coveting wrong? And we had to say, no, not all coveting is wrong. In the first century, those Christians were told to covet earnestly the best gifts. Now, we're not going to be desiring spiritual gifts today as they fulfilled their purpose, and we now have the finished revelation. But one thing that Mark said recently, I think he was doing the announcements, and he talked about coveting brethren's prayers. We looked at Luke 22:14. Jesus said, with strong desire, I have desired to take the Passover. That's the same word for translated covet over here, zelu. When we come to 1 Corinthians 13:4, look at what it says. Charity suffereth long and is kind. Charity envieth, zelu, same word. Charity envieth not, and charity vaunteth not itself, is not puffed up. So We're going to, I'll tell you, we'll have two parts of this class. Today's part one, where we'll look at some other ideas of envy. So we see, just in the way that we studied covetousness, it's not always bad to have strong desire. And we see here the negative connotation of that word, how it can be used. You can translate it covet, you can also translate it envy, but what's the difference between the two? Just like fornication and adultery, there's this subtle difference. What would you say it is? Go ahead. You go, Jackie.
I would say covetousness is you have something and you just worshiping it, you want to just hold on to it.
Okay.
And envy is wanting something that somebody else has.
Okay. So we're going to look at that. We're going to have a very, I say these subtle differences. Now, Colossians 3, the way that you said it, you have it and you want to hold on to it. That's where Colossians 3 says covetousness is idolatry. So when you have it, it turns into your idol. Ian, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, pretty similar to what Jackie was talking about. Like, the difference in my mind between the two is, if I'm coveting something, I can be coveting an object, the possession of an object, and if I'm envying, usually that's the person, there's a personality involved, so it's not just that I wish I had the thing, but I actually am burning that I'm not the person, or that this person has the thing that I don't have.
Okay. So we recognize it's moving beyond just the simple desire of, and we would say strong desire, I really want it. Do you have, anybody else have anything else? Okay, Cindy.
Would it also involve like having negative feelings toward your brother?
Okay.
Or your sister? Like,
Yes.
Covetousness, like, or rather envy moves into like the realm of having this negative feeling towards.
Okay. That's, and then Terry.
One, like covet means you actually an action and you take it, and then the envy is you're like burning.
So, a little on what she said about coveting, she said, could coveting be reserved for when you actually take it? And so, we would have to say coveting is still just a desire even before you act on it, because in Romans 7, Paul says, I would not have known the law. No, he said, I would not have known lust, except the law would say, you shall not covet. Well, we know lust is actually before the actual taking of it. So, but let's look at this. Those were all very good comments, and you guys were basically all touching it all around. So let's look at this. Here's where it's used in the New Testament. Acts 7:9. Now, this is going to be talking about Joseph and his brothers. One second. Joseph and his brothers, when it says the patriarchs, it's talking about the 12 tribes of Israel and the fathers of the tribes. The patriarchs moved with envy, sold Joseph into Egypt, but God was with him. Now that's Acts 7:9. Acts 17:5, and we see up top the big red letters. We're noticing commonality in here, and we're going to ask what it is. But the Jews which believed not, moved with envy, took unto them certain lewd fellows of the baser sort, and gathered a company, and set all the city on an uproar, and assaulted the house of Jason, and sought to bring them out to the people. One more. That's Acts 7:9, Acts 17:5. Now look at Acts 13. When the Jews saw the multitudes, they were filled with envy, spake against those things which were spoken by Paul, contradicting and blaspheming. Then Paul and Barnabas waxed bold, and said it was necessary that the word of God should first have been spoken to you. But seeing you put it from you, and judge yourselves unworthy of everlasting life, lo, we turn to the Gentiles. For so hath the Lord commanded us, saying, I have set thee to be a light of the Gentiles, that thou shouldest be for salvation unto the ends of the earth. And when the Gentiles heard this, they were glad, and glorified the word of the Lord. And as many as they were ordained to eternal life believed. The word of the Lord was published throughout all the region. But the Jews stirred up the devout and honorable women and the chief men of the city, and raised persecution against Paul and Barnabas, and expelled them out of their coast. Now that's Acts 13:45 through 50. So, Acts 7, Acts 17, and Acts 13, envy is used in all three discussions, but what is the commonality besides the word itself? Okay, interaction between other people. What's their problem? We recognize it's the Jews' problem. What is their problem? And then what comes about from their envy? Do you want to see the other slide again? Patriarchs moved with envy sold Joseph into Egypt. Jews which believed not, moved with envy, took unto them certain lewd fellows of the baser sort, gathered a company, and set all the city on an uproar. Saul to the house of Jason, sought to bring them out to the people.
Attack. Attack.
Okay, an attack. I'm looking for exact words, like brevity, like action. He got it. Number one, let's look at their problem. They want the crowds, right? That's their problem. They see that the Christians and their teaching are beginning to get attention, both places. The Jews which believe not move with envy. Well, what's their problem? Gentiles are starting to give ear to Paul's teaching. They don't like it. So they want to be the religious figures in the community. Does anybody disagree that Jews wanted to be the teachers? That's Matthew 23. They wanted to be the teachers. We'll get to Acts 7:9 in a later way. They want the people's attention. They want to have the position of authority, and so they take action. And it's when we look at it, it's negative action. They are willing to go to what low level? What are they willing to do here? When you're willing to basically scrape the bottom of the barrel to help your cause rather than just promoting the truth, because this is a religious discussion, they scrape the bottom of the barrel, take the baser sort, get these awful people together, and they start an uproar. Acts 13, that's the same thing. They have desire. There's their strong desires for the audience, the crowds, and because they cannot get that, then they start taking evil action. Now let's look at a very exact definition, and this would be good for your notes. Next week when we come back for Envy Part 2, we'll have a homework handout. We'll take a quiz on what we did today. We don't have any today, but let's look at this. Here's your exact definition. And Cindy was touching on it to a great degree. Is desire involved in covetousness? Strong desire? Yes. Is strong desire involved in envy? Yes. But here's the difference between the two. Envy denotes the kind of zeal which does not try to help others, but rather harm them, the predominant concern for personal advancement, and then it says to envy in the more hostile sense of not wanting others to have things. Now, Cindy, I can't remember how you said it, but I think you just said harboring. You begin to harbor bad feelings towards your brother or sister based on either what they have in that sense, and I would say that's going to be it. Now, the way that my dad's dad would say it, his thing was he'd see somebody driving a nice car and he would say, I wish I had that car and they had a better one. Well, we all know what you're doing, right? You're trying to get around it. But it's the idea of you also don't want them to have it. Now, where my mother's mother lived, there was a husband and a wife. This makes no sense, but it's envy on. A husband and a wife started their very, very small restaurant. There was only room in there for 3 tables. But you could also come in and get takeout. Just a husband and a wife cooking together, serving people. And so it became quite popular in this tiny little town. And then do you know what happened when it got really popular? You would think it's growing. People stopped eating there. Because different people became jealous that this husband and wife were becoming so successful. And now you know why it doesn't make sense? Majority of those people weren't even trying to open a restaurant. It's not like you're in competition. You just don't like seeing them succeed. That's envy. If you want to do something, do something. You want to open up your own restaurant, you better make sure you can cook. But this husband and wife, they did their thing. They were doing a good job at it. And when people started seeing they were successful, they punished them for it. That's envy. Now let's look at some of our points from last time, and let's notice the difference of these things. just this, if we could call it, just this subtle detail like adultery and fornication. So we used Eve as a discussion point of covetousness. She saw it. She then began to reason out. Now let's pause here. What did we say was the idea of covetousness? It's strong desire that does what?
Causes you to abandon reason.
Okay, it's strong desire that causes you to abandon your reason. We said about Eve, there's all kinds of questions that Eve should have been asking. She should have asked the serpent, if you're a created being and I'm a created being, why would I listen to you above the Creator? And she could have asked, what experience do you have to give me this idea? James.
Adam and Eve was not supposed to eat the tree of good and eat of knowledge.
But they could have eaten of every other tree, right? So in that sense, she should have recognized it's not like we're going without. We're very well provided for. Now, let's see the difference. Did Eve have to take from anybody else? Did she have to physically harm anybody to get what she wanted? In the process of her desire, did she hate anybody? Now, the other example we used was Numbers 11, where the Israelites, they wanted quail rather than manna. And they said, we remember all the different foods that we had back in Egypt. Did they have to take from anybody else when they wanted that quail? No. Did they have to harm anybody physically? No. Did they hate anybody? No, they're just in general complaining. Joshua 7, we looked at Achan. Now, let's think about this. If someone wants to say it, that's fine. Did Achan have to take from anyone or harm anyone to receive what he wanted? No. Somebody could say yes. Why? Okay, Ian says, well, in Joshua 7, or Joshua 6 and Joshua 7, after the fall of Jericho, they had, quote, killed and harmed the people of Jericho. But again, that's not going to be categorized as envy, because it's not like Achan as a lone individual went inside Jericho because he said, I want this one man's stuff. It's wartime. It's not the same. And did he hate anybody? I don't think that they hated these people. So let's look at this. Covetousness is just a strong desire to the point where you're no longer happy with what you have. You're abandoning your reason. We recognize we're very well taken care of, but for some reason we just need more. We are going to start seeing envy. Now let's look at this first slide. And I would ask, what is the common thing that we envy people for? I mean, it's on the screen, but would you disagree with that? That in America, the common theme of envy is just stuff. So I was talking to Joey and Michelle the other day, and we were talking about past Christmases. And so Michelle's younger brother, I grew up with him. And we were very, very good friends. If he wasn't at my house, I was at his house. And there was one year where the new Xbox was coming out. And somehow, TJ talked his parents into letting him open his presents early. And he got his Xbox. And I remember I told Joey and Michelle, I said, man, I was so mad. And they said something, they asked me, like, why were you mad? They said, was it because of this? I said, no, it was just straight envy. And I said he was getting to play his Xbox before the rest of us. We said wait like at least 15 days before we all got ours. So I looked at what he was getting to do. I'm jealous that I'm not getting to do it, but let's look at this. In 1 Kings 21, 1 through 4. The most common thing I think that people would say that we covet or that we envy is people's stuff. They've got more than we have. Or they have things that are better than what we have. Let's look at 1 Kings 21 and 1 through 4. It came to pass after these things that Naboth the Jezreelite had a vineyard, which was in Jezreel, hard by the palace of Ahab, king of Samaria. And Ahab spake unto Naboth, saying, give me thy vineyard, that I may have it for a garden of herbs, because it is near unto my house, and I will give thee for it a better vineyard than it. Or, if it seem good to thee, I will give thee thy worth of it in money. And Naboth said to Ahab, the Lord forbid it me, that I should give the inheritance of my fathers unto thee. And Ahab came into his house heavy and displeased, because of the word which Naboth the Jezreelite had spoken to him. For he had said, I will not give thee the inheritance of my fathers. And he laid him down upon his bed and turned away his face and would not eat bread. Now I'm asking you, based on what we've already said in the class, does this sound like this is envy?
Sounds like covetousness.
Okay, I wouldn't categorize this as envy. Ian says this sounds more like covetousness. It starts out pretty honest. He's willing to buy it, right? And he actually says to him, does he not say, I will give thee a price for it better? I will give thee for it a better vineyard than it, or if it seem good to thee, I will give thee the worth of it in money. So he's willing to make a fair, not even a fair trade, a better trade. And then he says, I'm willing to pay money for it. This, I don't think, is exactly dishonest in what's going on here. But anybody who knows the rest of the story, what's going to happen to Naboth?
He's going to wind up becoming the enemy of the focus of...
Okay. Now, even this down here, you know, I don't know that I would put this as a bad situation for Ahab. It doesn't make sense. You're the king of all Samaria, and you just have to have his vineyard. I guess that's where we would say the covetousness. He's abandoning reason, and he comes home, he won't even eat bread. But now let's look at this, verses 5 through 10. But Jezebel, his wife, came to him and said unto him, Why is thy spirit so sad that thou eatest no bread? And he said unto her, Because I have spoken unto Naboth the Jezreelite, and said unto him, Give me thy vineyard for money, or else, if it please thee, I'll give thee another vineyard for it. And he answered, I will not give thee my vineyard. Jezebel, his wife, said unto him, Dost thou now govern the kingdom of Israel? Arise, eat bread, and let thine heart be merry. I will give thee the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite. So she wrote letters in Ahab's name and sealed them with his seal, sent letters unto the elders and to the nobles that were in his city, dwelling with Naboth. And she wrote in the letter, saying, Proclaim a fast, set Naboth on high among the people, and set 2 men, sons of Belial, before him to bear witness against him, saying, Thou didst blaspheme God and the king, and then carry him out and stone him that he may die. Now, someone would look at this and say the orchestration to have Naboth killed, someone would just say, well, that's just murder. Well, based on the definition that we've already looked at, to envy in the more hostile sense of not wanting others to have things, this is envy. They look at what a man has, and they want it to such a degree that they're willing to harm the person, or just simply say, if we can't have it, we don't want them to have it. What's up? Y'all good? Oh, okay. Okay, so let's look at this now. We would say, I don't know that I would call Ahab envious, where we're not going to be able to ignore the fact that his wife, Jezebel, certainly is envious. Now, when we ask the question, what's the most common thing that would be envied, one person to the next? Physical stuff. Is there anything else you can think about that would really, really gender up envy inside of a person?
Positive attention.
Okay, how do you mean that?
So like if one child starts acting out because they perceive
Oh,
that
okay.
their brother or sister is getting more positive attention than they are,
Okay.
then they might come to actually resent their brother or sister for getting that positive attention instead of...
Okay, does anybody else have anything else that they want? I said, what's another thing that would really gender up envy to the point you don't want them to have it and you actually would be willing to do them bodily harm? Mark.
Well, you talking about adultery while ago.
Yeah.
Man's wife or husband.
Right. Okay, and so I think okay. Mark is saying when a man, that's Proverbs chapter 6, when a man finds out that his wife has been unfaithful, the feeling of jealousy towards what's been given to this new man causes the desire to do bodily harm. Okay, so anything else before we look at the next slide? Okay, the way that Ian said it, how did you say it? Positive attention? Okay, positive attention. Mark said jealousy. One more, James 4, before we look at our next point. James 4, 1 through 5 gives a note of physical possessions cause envy. From whence come wars and fightings among you? Come they not hence even of your lusts that war in your members? You lust and have not, you kill and desire to have. You cannot obtain, you fight in war, yet you have not because you ask not, and you ask and receive not because you ask amiss that you might consume it upon your own lusts. So he said this is the driving force behind people's wars. They want more possessions. They want more stuff so they can consume it on their own lust. But I would like for us to look at something else, though. And so let's pause before we actually look at the next one, because, I mean, the next one is going to hit, I think, really heavily. But what is the answer to dealing with this type of envy for physical stuff? Okay, contentment. So there's a book, Ian and I were talking about this book the other day, and it's called Psycho-Cybernetics, and the point of it is this man who's a doctor is telling you in the book that you can convince your brain to overcome just about anything. And the way that he would be saying that is, and the way that I would phrase it that way about the book, is because one of the most common readers of that book are bull riders and rodeos. And so what are they doing with their mind?
They are convincing themselves, regardless of the visual evidence, that they are capable of getting on this giant bull and actually maintaining some semblance of control to where they're not going to get, like, majorly maimed or killed.
Okay, they are making their brain overpower their nerves by anything. I can hold on. It only takes 8 seconds. If I fall off, I mean, all kinds of different things. They're making their brain overpower everything else. So, what people just don't understand, and I'm saying, y'all, they do it anyways. Do you remember a couple weeks ago we said, we were talking about there is no middle ground, right? Because we said you practice things. You either practice the pursuit of stuff or you practice contentment. There is no in between. And so we all have to make up our mind which way we're going to be. And so what that takes is regular rehearsing. So look at Proverbs 14:30. A sound heart is the life of the flesh, but envy the rottenness of bones. So the Bible calls envy a sickness. Now, let's look at this. We all know this, and you would say about, if it wasn't something like, you know, we tell, or people have been informed, smoking causes cancer, and they just keep doing it. Well, somebody would say, well, that's big time habit forming. I think if we keep it exercise and practice in our mind, get more stuff, and we associate stuff with happiness, it's habit forming. It's certainly a practice thing. We said you're either practicing contentment or you're practicing covetousness. But here the text says it is a rottenness to the bones. It's a sickness. So we would have to get this under control. Now, what does that really look like? Mark said you practice contentment. But what does that look like? Okay, it's a sense of having gratitude. Give me an actual real-life example of what it means to teach yourself to be content. Hello, Mr. Robertson. This is your cell phone provider. We want to let you know that you're up for an update with a small charge of XYZ. You know, my phone has been working for the past 5 years. It's not broke. I'm okay. That's what it looks like. All types of different things. It's, you go through the store, you go to a restaurant. When you're leaving out the restaurant, what's usually stacked up at the door as you go out? Free to everybody. Take one. Shoppers, real estate books, all different things like that. Are you doing just fine? I'm doing just fine. Then I don't even need to know what's in there. Now someone would say, well, that sounds a bit extreme. I can't even look. What does looking lead to? You saw Joshua 7. I saw what I wanted and I took it. And that's exactly why Dad says he doesn't go in Walmart. I don't need anything in there. I'm doing just fine, so I don't even go in the store. That's what we're saying. We really need to put these things into action. We say, well, it's contentment. That's true. But what does it look like? Have a sense of gratitude. What does that look like? It means saying, no thank you. Not just saying thank you. It's no thank you. I'm fine with what I have. Now let's look at this one. Look, y'all, we all struggle with the possession part. There's no doubt. We all do that. We're Americans. We struggle with it. But even more than that, everybody has this. Affection. Now, he called it, what did you say? Positive attention. Affection. Affection is one of the biggest proponents of envy. Now, let me look at something we have viewers and they're participating in class. Okay. Envy brought on by affection. Now let's look at this. Why did Cain kill Abel?
Because he was wrong.
Okay, well, why was he wrong? It is what Ian said.
Abel got more attention.
Positive attention. Look at that. You would look at somebody and say, hey, man, do your thing, right? Because Cain had already made it up in his mind. He had to say, this is what I like. The text says he's a keeper of the ground, tiller of the ground, and he brings the fruit of the ground. So he made it up in his mind. This is going to be great. But unto Cain and his offering he had no respect. Cain was very wroth, and his countenance fell. And the Lord said unto Cain, why art thou wroth, and why is thy countenance fallen? If thou doest well, shalt thou not be accepted. Positive attention. And if thou doest not well, sin lies at the door, and unto thee shall be his desire, and thou shalt rule over him. And Cain talked with Abel his brother, and it came to pass, when they were in the field, that Cain rose up against Abel his brother and slew him. Now, people would say, this is the thing that I say all the time, people don't like us being vocal when people go outside of the Bible. They're religious, and they start breaking biblical precedent. You know, at the end of the day, if we said anything or not, they're still going to be incorrect. And through the example of Genesis 4, they're not going to get the respect of God if they're actually breaking God's commands. So you have it this way. One gets positive affection, the other does not. Is there actually, and let's look at this. Can there be envy even if there's basically, if Cain and Abel both got positive affection, could there still be envy? Okay, how so?
You might not even want an equal.
Okay. Now, I'm going to come back to this one because based on the question that we just asked. That is exactly why we asked the question, why did Joseph's brothers sell him into slavery? Israel loved Joseph more than all his children. They're getting positive attention, but they're not getting as much positive attention. You can't even say in situations like this where we're saying they are getting positive attention, they're getting affection, but they're not getting as much affection. At this point in time, you can't actually say to somebody, but isn't getting some affection better than no affection? And they say, not when I see him getting even more affection than what we get. This is, I think, y'all, the biggest thing that we're going to wrestle with. It's everywhere. So let's make a point out of this. You know, we were watching a show the other night that depicted people in a newsroom, and they had this person who, you know, if you all work in the paper together, do you want the paper to succeed? But how do you want the paper to succeed? You want it to succeed because of your contribution. And so in the story, they had this one young reporter, and that person was blowing the paper up. They actually were saying, hey, we're losing subscribers over here. Well, she starts bringing all attention to this paper, and then what happens? Her boss won't even tell her good job. How awful. That you're in the same team, you want the same goal, but it's not good enough if other people bring it in. That is envy, y'all. It's in the workplace. It's big time in families. And it is in the church too. Let's look at one more. Why did Jacob's wives fight with each other? Rachel and Leah. Okay. Let's see. Genesis 29:31, when the Lord saw that Leah was hated, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. Now, did Jacob actually hate, the way we use the word hate, did he hate Leah? No. Did he love her less than Rachel? Yeah. He wanted to marry Rachel. He was tricked into taking Leah. What did he say? Positive attention? It's not equal positive attention. Now we've got problems. When Rachel saw that she bare Jacob no children, Rachel envied her sister and said unto Jacob, give me children or else I die. Now let's talk about this, y'all. What we saw in Proverbs 14:30. Envy is a disease in your bones. Why, if you're Rachel, why does it make sense for you to get your envy under control? In your own mind, we're saying nobody's going to come along and say, hey, you are being envious. But why is it to your own benefit to say, I got to stop this?
The type of things that envy will bring out in a person can actually be counterproductive to them attracting the sort of attention that they would like.
Okay.
So like being a contentious.
So that's a bit different than what I was thinking. Ian actually makes a note of, if you're becoming visibly envious, you're running the risk of making yourself less attractive to your husband. Is that what you're getting at? Okay. So you don't recognize it, but you're actually making yourself less appealing. So what do you have a problem of? You have a problem that your sister bears your husband children. Okay, well that might be a problem. In your mind is a problem. But even more of a problem, nobody wants to be around notably envious people. Okay. Now let's do this. Let's make another point. Ian said it could make you less attractive. What's one other reason why she should get on her own self and say, this is not good? It doesn't make her able to have children. It's not helping you. So why would you fixate on it? Hating someone who can have a child does not make you reproductive. So what are you doing? You are big time giving yourself stress that has no value. But what will stress do to your body? Stress will make you sick. So you can't have kids. You run the risk of making yourself less desirable to be around, and then you could possibly be making yourself have such inner turmoil to where you become physically ill. Now, let's look at one more point. For anybody who would say, like the affection part, we're envious of affection. Some people could maybe think that it's just about the kids. It's not just about the kids. Let's look at this. In Genesis 30:14 and 15, Reuben went in the days of wheat harvest and found mandrakes in the field and brought them unto his mother Leah. Then Rachel said unto Leah, these are the same women, two sisters, give me, I pray thee, of thy son's mandrakes. And she said unto her, is it a small matter that thou hast taken my husband? And wouldest thou take away my son's mandrakes also? And Rachel said, therefore he shall lie with thee tonight for thy son's mandrakes. So what are they really doing here? It's not just the kids. They're competing for affection from the husband. What do kids do? They compete for affection from their parents. You get into a school system, what are you doing? We said affection. Does respect fit into the category of affection? Okay, I would say yes. So when you get into the school system, what do? You envy where people are in the classroom. Look, man, that's what we're saying. You pass the class, you don't have to be at the top of the class. You're succeeding. You're passing the class. You're learning the material. That's the point. Do you learn the material? Do you comprehend the material? It's not always about what you do on the actual test. You could maybe not perform so well on the test and still have it in practice and in theory. Now let's keep going. Jacob's wives, the brothers of Joseph. Now let's look at this. We saw this one already. Why? Now let's talk about this, y'all. Envy. Why did Saul begin to hate David? Okay. So what about the songs?
Songs were attributing greater glory to David than being attributed to Saul. For David to get more affection from the people.
Okay. Now, y'all, how notable this had to be to people, like when Ian said, that's really unattractive. So at the end of the discussion, where's the envy coming from? We know it's in ourselves, but what about ourselves is causing this envy to begin to manifest and grow? Okay, not what? Give me more than that. And what?
Self-image.
Okay. What else would you call that? Not content in self-image. What else would you call that?
Self-esteem.
Okay. Give me a second. Okay. Not content with self-image. Y'all, the amount of insecurity in this discussion, that's our problems, right? When Joseph's brothers see Joseph getting so much affection, what do they begin to think? Okay, why? Why would they do that if you basically recognize, my father loves me? You know he loves his children. So what's the problem? Now let's look at this, and we're going to look at the insecurityness. The insecurity, is that a word? The insecurityness? Insecureness, right? The insecureness here in King Saul. It came to pass, as they came, when David was returned from the slaughter of the Philistines, that the women came out of the cities of Israel, singing and dancing to meet King Saul, with joy, with instruments of music. And the women answered one another as they played and said, Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s. Saul was very wroth. The saying displeased him. And he said, they have ascribed unto David 10,000, unto me they have ascribed but thousands. And what can he have more but the kingdom? And Saul eyed David from that day forward. Now this moment of envy, how ridiculous is it? Okay, so you already know the outcome. Mark is saying, why be upset? You already know the big time outcome.
You could also be saying, there's also another position that could be taken where it's like, look at my fantastic service. This individual that's self-independent, the king is not going to be just fantastic at everything. He's going to have people that are actually good in this position.
Okay, so in one, Mark says, well, you already know that you're going to be taken off the throne, so you might as well come to grips with it rather than fight God. And then Ian, I believe, Ian, would you be making the point that it's a team win? So why would a king, a well-ruling king, why would he be upset with a win for the team? So even like with what Mark said, here's what my thought was. Even what Mark says, you already know, God's already said the kingdom's going to be rent from you. In the moment, though, because like we're at 1 Samuel 18, you know, in 1 Samuel 16, is it a secret that Samuel goes to anoint David? It is a secret, right? Because Samuel says, I'm going to go up here and offer sacrifices. Okay. Well, while he's up there, he anoints the new king. But let's look at this. The amount of insecurity. How big is King Saul? We don't know like exact foot, but what does the Bible say? Saul is head and shoulders above everybody. What happens when David tries to put Saul's armor on? Can't even fit into it. Man, one kid gets a little bit of praise, and a man of that stature, if he thinks he's doing an okay job as being the king, would you imagine becoming jealous of that person? You're way bigger than everybody else. You are already a proven and notable soldier, and now you envy this probably like 17, 18-year-old kid. It makes no sense. And I would say, talk about being unattractive. Now, let's make a new point. The difficulty about it, y'all, we're examining this. What's going on in Saul's head? Does he know? Oh, go ahead.
Could it also be like David would be a very close and trusted individual to Saul? Does anything undermines about this person?
Okay. Now Tanner's making the point that we have a saying for that. Tanner says, well, David has been close to Saul, and now he could possibly be feeling like he's being undermined by Saul. And we have a phrase for that. What is it? Familiarity? Okay. Ian said, well, it's a win for the team. Yeah, but also the closest people around you can also get under your skin like nobody else. Familiarity breeds contempt. But this was the question I was asking. How is, and this I'm saying, y'all, it's us when I ask about Saul. Do you notice that you're being envious? Not all the time.
Your dad was making a point while ago in a video where it said the idea, the concept that was being presented in a particular talk was that being wrong feels just like being right.
Yeah.
So it's like if I'm beginning to become envious, it's going to feel like righteous indignation at first. It's not going to feel like I'm sinning. It's going to feel like there's an injustice taking place.
So I agree with both of that. Ian is saying that the feeling can feel justified. And so when Mark said sometimes, I would say this, mixing y'all's response, Ian said at first it could feel like I'm justifying. And Mark says, well, sometimes you know it, sometimes you don't. I think that we begin to feel it less and less when we actually are justifying it more times and more times. We justify over and over these feelings that we deserve and we should be having. And we see it played out right there in front of us in the Old Testament text. Now, we can have it too. And like I said, it's in the church, and it's in Philippians 1:15, where Paul says some people are actually preaching out of envy and strife. But as we wrap up, we recognize this. How is that going to look? How could individuals actually be preaching out of envy and strife? Some individuals could be actually going even harder than they normally would so that they could get more praise than the next fellow. But at the end of it, Paul says, hey, I do rejoice in that, because everywhere Christ is going to be preached out of that. Now here's one more thought, and then we'll wrap up. How did the Pharisee envy the publican? Now remember, we said at the beginning one of those definitions was, are you willing to cause them bodily harm? Yes. But there was a second point to it also, that you would actually want them to be without. So you look at the text, and I would say it's the same thing as we would see with Joseph's children. I don't know necessarily right now all the ins and the outs of why some Christians are so unwilling to extend grace to other Christians. I don't know if their thought process is, if those folk get more grace, it means less for me. I don't think that they really think that way. I think that it basically comes from this idea. It makes them feel superior. Like Ian said, you don't want an equal. So you always want to feel superior, which means they're going to have to go without. 2 men went up into the temple to pray, the one a Pharisee, the other a publican. The Pharisee stood and prayed thus with himself, God, I thank thee that I am not as other men are, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, or even as this publican. I fast twice in the week. I give tithes of all that I possess. Now we know it says about the publican, would not even lift his eyes up into heaven, but he smote his breast and said, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. So let's ask this question. He's feeling good about what he's got going on. So what's he going to feel when he interacts with a Jew who says, I fast 3 times in a week, and I also give tithes of all that I possess, and then a little bit more than he does? Now how's he going to feel? He's not even going to be happy with his own performance anymore. He is going to envy this other man. Now, you are bound at some point to find somebody who is, in fact, your superior. What difference does that make to you? You do the best that you can, I do the best that I can, and as we have been saying consistently, if it's a team win, fantastic. You know what they say when Michael Jordan won the championship? Everybody gets a ring. So why would you be mad that he's like the biggest scorer on the team? He did not want this person to have it. He wanted him to go without. If anybody was performing more than he did, then he would be feeling envious towards that person. It's a sickness. And here's the thing, y'all. We all have to watch out for it. If it's in your physical family, and we're brothers and sisters, then you know it's going to be in the spiritual family. Okay, we have to stop. We're at our time limit. Any questions or comments as we go out? Okay. All right, we'll take a quick break. We've already got our duty roster filled for the order of worship. Quick break. We'll come back in and we'll begin our hour of worship. Okay, good morning. Good to see everybody here today. Glad to have folk visiting with us, and one that's not here right now will be at 11, and then Jackie let me know today she was not feeling well again, so she won't be with us this morning. Let's remember to pray for her. This morning we're doing part number 2 of the study of envy, and it's going to be quite different than it was last week. We're basically doing the opposite side of it. So in last week's study material, as we went through over this material, what was the distinction that we made between covetousness and envy?
Envy is something that you really want to have.
Okay, well wanting to have something, great desire that's not yours, but we said that was going to be covetousness, is great desire. So we said covetousness is going to be strong desire for something. And in act, really, we said covetousness is such a strong desire that it would cause a person to abandon their reason. And our examples were Achan, Eve, and I can't remember our third example. Achan and Eve, strong desire. I know that we put Ahab in there, that he was the king of all Israel, and because he couldn't have one particular vineyard, it said he went home, cried in his bed, and wouldn't eat bread. Okay, that would be one. Covetousness. All right. So what was the distinguishing factor of envy? It is strong desire, but what else goes with it? Jealousy. Okay, and what manifests jealousy? That's just another word for envy. What would be the difference in that? There's one particular thing.
I would say envy is if your neighbor had a new car and you wanted one like it, and you envy them because they were able to get it.
Okay, but we're just using the word envy over and over. What does it actually mean in us? What are we doing inside of ourselves when we are having envy? No. That's where Proverbs says it's like a sickness. We had one thing that we said, two things. We do this internally. When we see someone have something else, what do we do to them? Okay, we are willing to harm them, or we hate them for it. We start building up this animosity. We got to make it bigger than just strong desire, because that's what covetousness is. Covetousness is strong desire where you abandon your reason. Envy is going to see somebody with something you want, and like we would say, the saying that we said was, I wish they had a better car and I had theirs. Envy is where you don't even want them to have the car. You want to have it, you want them to be without. Well, that doesn't make any sense. Now, do you remember some of the illustrations, biblical illustrations that we use for envy? Characters in the Bible where they openly displayed envy. Okay, Jezebel. Her husband wanted something. Naboth had it. She made this whole scheme to have Naboth killed. That is envy. Where you're willing to do someone else bodily harm. Okay, what about, we had in the book of Genesis. Okay, Cain and Abel. One man gets respect for his sacrifice, Abel, and Cain does not. So what does he do? He kills him. What would have been the right thing to do? Fix your sacrifice. You still have a bad sacrifice even though you just killed Abel. So that didn't do anything. Okay. Now this morning what we're going to do, now we had definitions last time that came out of this dictionary set. And what we discussed was envy was such a strong desire or willingness, wanting of something that you would be willing to harm other people, or to the degree that you don't even want them to have it. If I can't have it, I don't want them to have it. So this morning what we're going to do, this is why I said it's going to look quite different than what we did last week. It's a biblical look at false teachers, and we're going to do it by a study of envy. So we're looking at this word, and it's just like covetousness. Remember we said, is all coveting bad? Okay, so in this sense, we're going to have to look at the word that's used for envy and say it's not always going to be bad. Now, so did they text you, Tanner? Okay, I don't know if they're getting it or not. This morning, now let's say it this way. This, in our discussion, is not going to be just exactly the idea of envy the way that we did it last week, but what I'm saying is we're in here to study. We're not necessarily tied to a curriculum, and so this is the flip side of envy. Just like we did with covetousness, we said it's good to desire good things. Well, this morning we're going to look at how the word, and Mark said jealousy. This Greek word for envy can be translated either way. Envy, jealousy. That's why when he said jealousy, I said they're going to be the same thing. So, I'm saying just you thinking top of your head, Are there some good points of jealousy in the Bible? Can you think of anyone in exact place? What were we going to say? Okay. Mark got it. That's one of them. Paul told the brethren, I am jealous over you with godly jealousy. And it is going to be the same word that we would see. I don't know if you can see that. We'll make it bigger. Envy, zeal. That's what we've been studying today and last week. So he said, I am jealous over you with a godly jealousy. That word, jealousy or jealous, is going to be translated envy in other passages. So let's do this. Here's a quote that we're going to start with this morning. And you tell me how people do this outside of what we're about to study. It is, and they actually had this note inside of the definition. This was part of the discussion for the definition of envy and jealousy, that Greek word zeal. It is a tendency of Christians to exalt the gentler qualities and to depress the opposite. So what do people usually say? Christian behavior, non-Christian behavior. What would they say? We build up the gentle qualities. What gets a bad rap? I'm saying it's Christian duty. Mark. Okay. So that takes away the Christian command to rebuke, right? So Mark says the idea is live and let live. Well, that's a gentle, and really it's not, is it? It's passive. There's nothing gentle about it. It's just letting them go to a destruction. So people would say live and let live. Okay, what do people think that Jesus primarily did with his time? Okay, somebody just asked me the other day, they said, what does your church do for the community? I said, number one, I don't have a church. I said, but what are you looking for? What are you asking me? And she said, do y'all feed the homeless? Do you shelter the homeless? Do you clothe the homeless? And my thing I asked back to that is, how much do you see Jesus doing that? What's that? And when is he did in the middle of his teaching, right? That's right. So Mark 1:38, this is Jesus' big mission. He's got a 3-year window to do work. And Jesus says, let us go into the next towns that I may preach there also, for therefore came I forth. So he did feed folk, but like Mark said, you'll find it in the book of Mark chapter 8, that was after a 3-day teaching session. I'm fine to feed anybody that can hang out for 3 days and hear straight teaching. But even in John 6, he's going to tell a portion of the crowd, y'all just follow me because you're getting free bread. And then people start turning away. So it is a tendency of Christians to exalt the gentler qualities and to depress the opposite. So what we're really looking at is the idea of, let's look before we jump in, 2 Timothy 2:4. I'm sorry, I got that backwards. 2 Timothy 4:2. Preach the word, be instant in season, out of season. Reprove, rebuke, exhort with all long suffering and doctrine. So we're not even talking about, the way that Mark said a moment ago, and I think he would probably fit the religious crowd when he said the world. We're talking about people who are in man-made sects. They look at passages of the Bible and they only take these pleasant sides. They don't take anything that has any form of negativity. I had an elder one time tell me, he said, Caleb, if there's a bit of controversy at all to it, we don't touch it. Well, then you're not going to read anything written by Paul because he has a whole lot of correcting. Reprove and rebuke. Okay, let's look at this. This is our definition from last week. It came out of Kittle's Theological Dictionary. Denotes the kind of zeal which does not try to help others, but rather to harm them, the predominant concern being for personal advancement. And then it goes on to say, to envy in the more hostile sense of not wanting others to have things. So it's not just strong desire, it is strong desire basically at the cost of others. Taking from them, harming them. If you're without, then they might as well be without also. So let's look at how it's used. We said last week, we noticed a commonality. Acts 7:9, this is about Joseph and his brothers. The patriarchs moved with envy and sold Joseph into Egypt, but God was with him. Okay. They were envious. Now, let's make this point too. What did we say that we envy more than actual physical possessions? It's the thing that they envied. They were not envious of his coat of many colors. What were they envious of?
His dream, interpretation.
What was it? Affection. It notes in the Bible that Joseph was the favored son, and they wanted the affection. That's what we said was the most thing that people covet the most is actual, Ian called it positive attention, I think is what he said. Acts 17:5, the Jews which believed not, moved with envy, took unto them certain lewd fellows of the baser sort, gathered a company, and set all the city on an uproar, sought to the house of Jason, and sought to bring them out to the people. The apostles are teaching the truth. The Jews who will not believe the truth, they see the audiences that are gathering, and they do not want the attention going to anybody else. And so through envy, they start moving to take action against these people in a negative way. Now, here's what we're really focusing in on today. We get to have this study because we're already in the area of looking at the word zelu, how you want to pronounce it, zelu and zelos, which sounds like what in our English language? Zealous. Okay, so we're already in the area, so we might as well pick this up. We have to note that it's not all bad. He says, I bear them record. They have a zeal of God, but it's not according to knowledge. Now, is this a good attribute of them? It's good that they're zealous. It's bad that they're not basically pairing their zealousness with knowledge, and that's what the problem of the religious community today is. Traditionally, they're religious, but they aren't really focusing in on what the Scripture says. So we have to note that the word zelo, zelu, zealous, right here that we have in Romans 10:2 is not always going to be a negative thing. Look at 2 Corinthians 11:2. What Mark pointed out a moment ago. I am jealous, zelo, over you with a godly jealousy, for I have espoused you to one husband that I may present you a chaste virgin to Christ. Now look at the next verse. He says, but I fear lest by any means as the serpent beguiled Eve through his subtlety, so your mind should be corrupt from the simplicity that is in Christ. So what is he really talking about here? When he says, I'm jealous over you with a godly jealousy, what's he saying? What's making the jealousy arise? No. It's in the next verse, verse number 3. He's jealous, and there's some activity inside the Corinthian church that's causing this jealousy to come up. Okay. Being beguiled. Somebody, and you're going to read more about it in 2 Corinthians 11 because he's going to start talking about, he says that the minister of Satan can actually be turned into an angel of light. They're presenting themselves as a good individual. And he's going to go through 2 Corinthians 11 and he's going to say all their qualities, and he said, I have those qualities too. They're actually starting to hear false teaching. And he says, I'm becoming jealous over you with godly jealousy. And that same word in other contexts is translated envy. Now, can you think of another passage, and let me ask this question here. At this point in the New Testament, is Paul a Christian? Okay, Mark is saying that's a silly question, but we have to ask it. Paul is a Christian here. So can you think of another time in Paul's life where he talks about his great zeal? Okay, and how was it manifested? She said before he was a Christian. How did he manifest his great zeal? Persecuting the church. Now here's my question this morning. It's the same word. Does it have different meaning? Okay, I'm going to say no. And that's fine. We're going to reason with it, okay? And we're going to see where we get with this. We're going to get to a destination at the same time. He says, though I might also have confidence in the flesh, if any other man thinketh that he hath whereof he might trust in the flesh, I more. Circumcised the 8th day, of the stock of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of the Hebrews, as touching the law of Pharisee, and concerning zeal, persecuting the church. So how zealous was he when he thought that Christianity was actually incorrect? What was he willing to do? He was willing to travel from Jerusalem way up north to Damascus just to find people who were teaching this stuff. So he says, my zeal, I was traveling them out. I was persecuting the church. So here's my question. Paul was a practicing Jew. He really should have been a Christian by that point, but he wasn't yet. But when he thought something was the truth, his energy against these, what he would have called false teachers, was very great. Now here's my question. Did it change when he became a Christian? Did his view of false teachers change when he became a Christian? Okay, one person says no. Okay, one yes, but you're going to have to basically give some qualification. What changed? Okay, who the false teacher is changes in his mind, but the feeling's not going to change. Okay, let's look at it this way. When he says persecuting the church, now I said the point about he was willing to travel the map, Jerusalem to Damascus. What was he willing to do when he found these people? Okay, torture them. Acts 9 says he was Acts 8 and Acts 9 says he was dragging people out of their homes. He was taking them to prison. Acts 8, he's watching as they stone Stephen. So here it says he has zeal persecuting the church before being a Christian. But here he says, I'm having the same feelings. So what's the only difference? Because he says, I'm having the same feelings. And it's being directed toward the same category of people, false teachers. Same people, false teachers. Okay, well, wait a second. Same person, false teacher, same feeling, jealousy, and the outcome. Before he's a Christian, he said, I'll go and imprison him. Now, after he's a Christian, what's going to change?
Try to save people.
Okay, you are trying to save them. Now, we're not going to find any passages where Paul goes and arrests Jews, right? We're saying once he's a Christian, he's not going into people's homes. He's not going to be dragging them off to prison. Like James said, he is trying to teach them, but he's going to have these points. Now let's look at this. In Galatians 5:11, look what he says again about false teachers. I, brethren, if I yet preach circumcision, why do I yet suffer persecution? Then is the offense of the cross ceased. I would they were even cut off which trouble you. The way that they spoke back then, in the Old Testament, what does cut off mean? Okay, Mark said it. When you read in the Old Testament, let's ask this question. God said the 7 Canaanite nations would be moved out. What did he say about them? To what extent? Absolute destruction. Exodus 23:23, mine angel shall go before thee and bring thee into the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Canaanites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, and I will cut them off. Now, in the first century, Paul, as a Christian, he's a Christian, Galatians 5, he says, I wish that the people who were troubling you were cut off. The only way that we know that is by reading the Old Testament. He says, these 7 heathen nations, I will cut them off. So now let's keep looking at this. Do you see what somebody communicate back to me the point we're making here? How should we be viewing false teachers today? These people are a hamper and a danger on society. Mark said the common idea is live and let live. We're dealing in ideas. When do we basically say that somebody is an enemy to the state? When they damage property. When they lay hands on somebody. Are we talking about eternal destinations in this room? Why is that any less significant than anything we can do to each other's bodies? Why should people get to, and someone says, well, we have freedom of speech. I recognize we have freedom of speech, but we have freedom of speech too. Why do we not get to have full access to combat bad ideas, unscriptural ideas? Now let's look at this. So, look, I have no problem when false teachers are moved out of the way. Do I hate it for their families? I hate it for their loved ones. But in actuality, let's say this. I'll ask the question this way. Would anybody have had a problem if Joseph Smith died before he could have started Mormonism? Would you have a problem with that? If he died before he started Mormonism? I wouldn't. Man, we would have dodge a whole entire sect that teaches false doctrine. Look at what he says in Romans 12:19. I'm saying that Paul desired for false teachers to be taken out of the way. This morning, I have no problem with false teachers being taken out of the way. Now, Romans 12:19. This is Paul as a Christian. Look at what he says to other Christians. Dearly beloved, avenge not yourselves, but rather give place unto wrath, for it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. As individuals, do we get to go around paying people back? No. Like, I come out, somebody has slashed my tires. I don't get to go slash their tires. We're not operating that way. And this is the point I'm making. Before he was a Christian, Paul would go around and he would persecute these people. False teachers, jealousy. And I'm saying false teachers still exist. Paul still feels the same way. But he's not going to be personally acting against them in a physical manner. Look at what it says. Give place to God, but rather give place unto wrath, for it is written, vengeance is mine, and will repay, saith the Lord. If we didn't have chapter divisions, in Romans 13, which is the same discussion here, who does he say deals out vengeance? The government. Okay. Now, Romans 13:4, he is a minister of God to thee for good. But if thou do that which is evil, be afraid, for he beareth not the sword in vain, for he is a minister of God, a revenger to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil. Now let's look at this. Here's what I'm saying. In the first century, the false teachers were the Judaizers, trying to get people on the law of Moses. They were persecuting the church. They were giving out false doctrine. And I'm saying, y'all, that Paul wanted them, what he said in Galatians 5:12, to be cut off. He wanted them to be destroyed. So here's my thing. Why do we give false doctrine a pass today? Why is it that we have given it this soft feeling of saying, well, that's just your opinion? When Paul did not say that. Here we are at jealousy again. Envy, jealousy, but now we're putting it in a godly perspective. In 1 Corinthians 10:22, do we provoke the Lord to jealousy? Are we stronger than He? Do you know what the Old Testament says happens when you provoke the Lord to jealousy? Deuteronomy 32:21, they have moved me to jealousy with that which is not God. They have provoked me to anger with their vanities. I will move them to jealousy with those which are not a people. I will provoke them to anger with a foolish nation. In Deuteronomy 32:21, God's statement to the people of Israel is, when they start leaving the truth and they start going into idolatry with the other nations, He says, I will be moved to jealousy and I will provoke them to anger with a foolish nation. What nations did God use against Israel? Babylon and Assyria. What happens to the first century Jews? Who's going to overthrow them? Rome. Now, why do you think it's any different how Paul felt about false teachers after he became a Christian? It's just coming from a different source. Paul saw false teachers. He was jealous over their false doctrine. He had the same feeling, and he wanted them to be cut off. It's just coming from a different place now. He says, personally, I'm not going to be the one to go out and do it. But he said, the people who are persecuting us, the people who are teaching false doctrine, this is where it's going to come from. Romans 13:4. They are going to execute wrath upon these individuals who do evil. 1 Corinthians 10:22. Provoking the Lord to jealousy. This is a quote from Deuteronomy 32:21. He then brings a foolish nation on them, or a Gentile nation. Now look at this, Romans 8:18 and 19. We know that the first century church was being persecuted. And who was their biggest persecutor? Jews. Let's look at 1 Thessalonians chapter 2. For ye, brethren, became followers of the churches of God which in Judea are in Christ Jesus, for ye also have suffered like things of your own countrymen, even as they have of the Jews, who both killed the Lord Jesus and their own prophets, and have persecuted us, and they please not God, and are contrary to all men, forbidding us to speak to the Gentiles, that they might be saved, to fill up their sins always, for the wrath is come upon them to the uttermost. They are the ones teaching false doctrine. They're the ones getting in the way of the truth being taught. They're persecuting the church, and Paul says they're going to be taken out of the way. His feelings before and after, before being a Christian and then after becoming a Christian, his zeal did not change. He wanted false teachers taken out of the way. So my question today is, why do so many people basically give a pass to people like Joel Osteen? Look, I don't appreciate Joel Osteen doctrine. Baptists should not give Joel Osteen a pass either. Or Methodists. Why? I don't agree with Methodists, but do Methodists have distinctives? They have their own distinct ideas. Joel Osteen has no ideas. What do they say on Star Trek? Live long and prosper, man. That's Joel Osteen. He might as well just be on a Star Trek convention. He's not giving anything distinctive. None of these people are. So we ought to be saying, now let's look at this idea. All right? Let me stop. Is anybody confused? Paul, when he was a Jew, what he thought was false doctrine, he hated it. He said the people need to be taken out of the way. When he became a Christian and he saw false doctrine, he hated it. And he said in Galatians 5:12, I hope these people get taken out of the way. And he used the word cut off, which means they die. So someone is going to hear us and they're going to say, so Caleb, do you think that people who disagree with you deserve to die? Again, I said soft soap. That's really soft soaping it up. Number one, I'm not about to go start killing people. Right? Does anybody know what our state flag is? And then make it any different in the religious community? So when people have a boss and you call him an egomaniac, what do you try to do? Y'all be trying to get away from him. And I know there are a lot of people who on the job would even form a coup if they could to have him moved, to have him fired. Cindy, right? People would start writing letters. Things are not going well. Hey, we need to clean up shop. That's on the job. And we don't think that it applies in religion? Egomaniacs. That's a false teacher. In love with themselves. Love greetings in the markets. Now, let's say this. If they're big time in love with themselves, who do they not have time for? The people. They are too self-indulged to be talking to the people. In the highest seats in the synagogues, they love them. The chief rooms at feasts, and they devour widows' houses. This is a false teacher. Caleb, does anybody disagree with you? You just think they need to die? I'm saying y'all don't look at, people in the community don't look at the actual reality of what a false teacher is inside of the Bible. Devour widows' houses. Now, y'all, is everything that's in a movie made up? You know everything's not made up in a movie. I can't remember who it was. It was this movie that was made in like the 90s, and it was a young lawyer, and he was a lawyer who would help people get their will together. He travels over to this old lady's house, and he's helping her get her will. I don't have a problem necessarily with this part. He said, are you sure you don't want to leave any of this to your kids? And she said, no, they're not getting a thing. Hey, just because they're your kids, I mean, you got to leave everything to them. They could be some ungodly folk. So he said, you don't want to leave anything to your kids? She said, no, I don't want to leave anything to my kids. And he said, so what are you going to do with it? And she said, I'm going to give it all to this televangelist. Now, someone might say, well, she's dead at that point. She doesn't need it. Do you think that all these, quote, televangelists are waiting till people are dead? No. They are taking advantage of these people who are on fixed incomes. We have a widow in Martinsville who is living and has been living for several years since her husband died, and she lives right next door to a Pentecostal pastor. And you know what he tried to do? He started trying to say, well, really the lines are wrong. This is my land. They're right next door to each other. He said, my land extends over here, and the paperwork has been wrong all these years. Devouring widows' houses. For a show to make long prayers, the same shall receive greater damnation. Now here's the thing. Jesus himself said, this crowd of people, I'm sending them to hell. So why do I have to hold hands with them? And somebody says, well, Caleb, you got to play ball. No, I don't. Not with this crowd. And then I'll ask the question. People in today's world, they say, well, we got to play ball. Did Martin Luther have to play ball? Martin Luther told the Catholics straight up, here's my problems. And everybody loves Martin Luther. Jesus said, I'm going to send these people to hell. So I don't know why we would say, hey, we know that they're definitely hell-bound. Let's keep them in the world as long as we possibly can. And here's a point, y'all, about that. Have any of y'all noticed Joel Osteen aging? Mark says he has. I haven't. He's still looking good, isn't he? He's got a long time of just going to be lying to the people. Look at this. This is Acts 4. This is verses 1 through 3, and then it's verses 16 and 17. As they spake unto the people, the priests and the captain of the temple and the Sadducees came upon them, being grieved that they taught the people. Hey, if it's Bible education, why would these folk be mad? False teachers mad at me. I had a Baptist call me on the phone. He said, I want to debate you. I said, on what? He said, everything. I said, man, I can't believe you disagree with me on everything. They don't like us teaching the people. They preached through Jesus the resurrection from the dead, and they laid hands on them, put them in a hold until the next day, for it was now eventide, saying, what shall we do to these men? For that indeed a notable miracle has been done to them. These people saw the truth, they ignored the truth. So here's the thing. When we get into audiences, me, Mark, Ian, when we go places and people start saying, y'all ain't going to change our pastor's mind. You know, I know that. You know why? Because people can see the truth and they don't want to give up their error. Why? They like the seat that they're currently in, which is we get the best seat, we get the praise of the people, and we get the money. So here's another point. False teachers, the anatomy of a false teacher. You know, Dad taught an apostolic over in Reedsville. The man said it. There's only one church in the Bible. He said a person has to be baptized in order to be saved. But when it all came down to it, this is what he said. He said, but Johnny, I can't stop. He said, I can't stop tithing these people. And he just said, if I don't tithe these people, I won't make it. They see the truth. They know what's up. They like the position they're currently in. Now let's look at 2 Peter 2. But there were false prophets also among the people, as even there shall be false teachers among you, who privily shall bring in damnable heresies. Does false doctrine send a person to hell? Who privily shall bring in damnable heresies. Look, if there's no consequence to believing error, why bother? Why write all these epistles? You got people who are sneaking into the congregations in the first century and they're teaching false doctrine. And somebody comes along and says, well, that don't matter. Okay. They got to repent. That's right, James. They got to repent. So they would say, if doctrine doesn't matter, let's throw all these letters away and let's let them teach every Sunday. No. Believing error can be damnable to your soul. Even denying the Lord that bought them and bring upon themselves swift destruction. Many shall follow their pernicious ways, by reason of whom the way of truth shall be evil spoken of. And through covetousness shall they with feigned words make merchandise of you. The religious teachers make money off of the people. So, I asked a moment ago, who would have a problem if Joseph Smith had died before he could have gotten Mormonism off the ground? I wouldn't have a problem with it. Here is the new question. Charles Taz Russell. Charles Taz Russell started the Jehovah Witness, and his name is Charles Taz Russell. I don't know why I said Jehovah so hard like that. He started the Jehovah Witness sect. So in the 1920s, they said Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were going to resurrect. They were going to come out of the ground. They were going to live on the earth forever in 1920. So you know what they did in 1920? For Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they bought 2 Cadillacs, 2 brand new Cadillacs, and they bought 2 mansions in San Diego. Because they said, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are fixing to come back from the dead, and they need to have something to drive, and they need a place to live. Well, they didn't come back from the dead in 1920, so who drove the Cadillac and who lived in the mansion? Judge Rutherford. I would have no problem if he had died before they could have gotten all that stuff started. And I just don't know why. Like we said, had that quote, we're going to see it in a moment. They're teaching people doctrines that will damn their souls, and then they're taking money off the people until then. Folk are going to hell, and until they get there, they're going to funnel all their money to these false teachers. Prayer handkerchiefs, holy oils, holy waters, all those different things. Love offerings, pastor appreciation days, Easter, Christmas, pastor anniversary. This is the day he started working here. But he's also going to get an appreciation day. So he's going to get 2 special collections. It's all over the place. So here's the thing, y'all. I'm talking about false teachers who are stealing people's money this way. If I just told you it's a politician. It's a politician, and once a month he sends his lackeys into your personal business, and they collect more than what they already tax you. That's basically extortion, right? It'd be a shame for something to happen to some of your rental property. Wink, right? And then they start taking some of your money. Now, if I said it was a politician who did that, some people would start saying it'd be a shame if something happened to him. Wink. But we don't feel that way about false teachers. A person can do anything to our body, and we cry foul. We want justice. We want reparations. We want this. We want that. People going to hell, and we don't bat an eye at it. You know what this looks like? James was telling me he was out raking his leaves the other day, and his neighbor is blasting this gospel, quote, gospel music. And James, was talking with the guy, and he says Ephesians 5:19 and Colossians 3:16, there is no instrumental music in the New Testament. And James said that dude got mad, stormed in his house, hollering about stuff. That's what this is going to look like. We're going to have to really be pressing people. I'm saying, here's the thing, y'all. Pressing people to what degree? So I don't know how many excess bulletins we're going to have today. But I've said before, and I know people do take extra bulletins, and I said all of our immediate neighbors should be getting the bulletin. So yesterday, because I believe this, I drove just a little bit away, and I visited my 2nd grade school teacher, because I know she's a Methodist. And I gave her 2, she got probably about almost a whole year's worth of bulletins. And I said, you and I don't agree, but you're religious, I'm religious. I said, we ought to be able to have dialogue. I said, are you at least willing to take these? She said, yeah, I'll take them. So here's my thing. People would say, well, that's the preacher's job. I'm going to see my 2nd grade school teacher, and then I walked from my apartment to Uptown. And I'm not saying about the walk was like my leisure. But I gave another pack of bulletins to a kid's dad that I went to 2nd grade with. If I know these people, why wouldn't I reach out to them? Gave one to him, and then another person who's known my dad the whole time he's been in Virginia. They're not a Christian. They see me on a regular basis. Why would I not be giving them religious material? Well, they ain't going to read it. No skin off me. I tried. But we got to be trying. And it's going to have to look like this. It's like if I'm hosting how many hours of nighttime TV and daytime TV a week, and I can still think about, I'm going to go see my 2nd grade teacher, I know there's plenty of people that we can be drumming up. Because we're saying they are under the spell of false teachers. And in Martinsville, they're going to be having discussions about charismatic leaders. And we're saying in a bad way. Folk who will just convince people to do all kinds of bad things, and they say, well, he's the pastor. Don't you know people are under a spell? 2 Peter 2:18 and 19. While they promise the people liberty, they themselves are the servants of corruption. A smiling face and a slick hairdo does not make you a good person. And holding up the Bible does not make you a teacher of the truth. Who can quote Scripture? The devil in Matthew chapter 4. Hey man, quoting the scripture does not mean anything if it's taken out of context, which is what they're doing. They themselves are the servants of corruption. Now let's look at this quote one more time. If there's such a thing as godly jealousy, and we know what it looked like in the Old Testament, and then you have a New Testament apostle say, I am jealous over y'all with godly jealousy, and then he goes so far as to say, I hope that the false teachers, Galatians 5:12, get cut off. This should be the attitude that we hold towards false teachers. Does that mean y'all are going to start hunting folk up? No. We said we're going to leave it to Romans 13. God is going to do it in His own time, in some shape or fashion. Now, some people might be sitting here and saying, boy, this sounded unpleasant. And that's exactly what he said. It is the tendency of Christians to exalt the gentler qualities and depress the opposite. So do you know what somebody would say as we finish up this class? What did Jesus say to do? He says, if someone smacks you on the cheek, turn the other cheek. You know, he said that to the individual, and then it says God instituted the government, and Romans 13 says that the government does not bear the sword in vain. So what I have to conclude is the government doesn't turn the other cheek. What do? They arrest people. Rightfully so. If we didn't have, if we basically said turn the other cheek applied to the government, everybody in a court hearing, do you know what they would do? Well, Your Honor, I have repented of my sin. You're free to go. Who wouldn't do that? That's not the courtroom's place. That's not Romans 13's place. And I'm saying I'm giving them their place. I'm giving God, Romans 12, I'm giving vengeance over to God. But in the meantime, I'm going to have the attitude that Paul had and to say I'm jealous with the godly jealousy, which means we despise false doctrines. We're going to be aggressive against them. So like we said, this is not exactly envy the way we did it last week, but it is the flip side of it. It's godly jealousy. And we have to look at it as much as we look at the bad aspect of the word zelu or zelos. Okay, we'll stop here. Questions or comments? Okay, we'll take about 10-minute break and then we'll come back in for our worship hour. Okay, this evening I'm going to be presenting information that you would already be in line with. Big time, y'all are already in line with it, and I'm saying it is okay to be different. When I say you're already big time in line with this, you guys, you're members of the body of Christ, the majority of your family is not, so you already know it's okay to be different. But just in the world that we're living in, you are constantly bombarded with different ideas about how you're supposed to react to things, how we're supposed to adapt to things, and just general behavior. I think Ian did a lesson in Danville not too long ago where he talked about people's imaginary religious etiquette. That's not coming from the Bible, so where are they getting these ideas? Now, point number one that we look at tonight is 2 Samuel 12, 21 through 23. So, I don't know about people in this room. I don't know what that was, if it happened in anybody in here, in your past. I've heard a lot of people, and this is just my way of thinking, and I can't speak for it because it hasn't happened to me, but David's reaction when Bathsheba gives birth to their child and 7 days later it dies. Then said his servants unto him, What thing is this that thou hast done? Thou didst fast and weep for the child while it was alive, but when the child was dead, thou didst rise and eat bread. And he said, While the child was yet alive, I fasted and wept, for I said, Who can tell whether God will be gracious to me, and the child may live? But now he's dead, wherefore should I fast? Can I bring him back again? I shall go to him, but he shall not return to me. And the thing that I was saying before actually reading the text is, I've known several people who have lost children in infancy, and I don't mean it in any unkind way, but I basically know the way they were going to raise that child, and it was not going to grow up to be a Christian. They weren't going to teach it to be a Christian. And so when I see that happen, I think, as far as the child, that's in the child's best interest because there's no telling how they were going to raise it. But when you look at David, it is his child. And he's able to just confidently say, this isn't a bad thing. The child's going to heaven. we go to heaven, I'm going to be reunited with the child later. But here's the thing. If this happened in today's hospital room, or, the child had been born 7 days later, and it's a total opposite. You were sad when it was sick, and now that the child's dead, you're just going back business as usual. Well, number one, you can't do anything about it. And number two, you are going to have to go back to business as usual. You're going to have to carry on with life. But everybody would look at this and think, that's ridiculous. This is crazy. Now let's look at another point. You know that it is okay to be different based on this passage, 1 Peter 2:9. You are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a peculiar people, that should show forth the praises of him who hath called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. Now we know this passage. Be peculiar. Be a little bit different. You stand out from the world. And we're going to look at some points, and I want us to think about it. We're going to keep going. This is the very, very consistent idea of reading the Bible. So let's talk about this point. Consistent idea of reading the Bible. How much information would you and I have to study before we would say, I'm very convinced? Okay, I've seen enough scriptures where this is the idea. Christians, in that one sense, don't fit into their communities. And as he thus spake for himself, Festus said with a loud voice, Paul, thou art beside thyself, much learning doth make thee mad. But he said, I'm not mad, most noble Festus, but speak forth the words of truth and soberness. How is it the case that you find the truth, you leave your particular branch of sectarianism, you are added to the body of Christ, and everybody thinks you're crazy. And then you have to say, no, this is like the most clear that we have been thinking in regards to the Bible, and that's why we're making these choices. It's always going to be that way. Always going to be different. And I would ask this question tonight. We're going to be making a point here in just a moment. Is it not possible that, as crazy as people think that it is for you to, quote, leave one church and go to another, is there still not so much more that we could be doing that people would be saying, this is crazy? And what we're really saying is being peculiar. Much learning has made you mad. Genesis 19:14, Lot was telling his family, we've got to get out of Sodom. Lot went out and spake unto his sons in-laws, which married his daughters, and said, Up, get you out of this place, for the Lord will destroy this city. But he seemed as one that mocked unto his sons-in-laws. They said, this guy sounds crazy. There's so much that we're trying to prepare other people for, and we've prepared ourselves, but we're trying to prepare for them for it, and they think that we're crazy. Now, in Luke 17, Jesus says, remember Lot's wife. And what was his warning about remember Lot's wife?
Don't look back.
That's it. Don't go back. Don't look back. Don't go back into the city. Don't be getting your clothes. If you're on the rooftop, don't be thinking about all your possessions. So the warning is materialism. Things that are different. You've already obeyed the gospel. People think that it's crazy to actually do what the Bible says in order to be saved. They think it's crazy to be added to one particular church that you read about in the Bible. But now let's talk a bit about this, our living arrangements. In 1 Corinthians 9, let's make this point before we move on. And I think you know this too. I think it goes without saying. Different doesn't mean weirdo. Right? In 1 Peter 3, when he talks about the way that women should present themselves, he said, let it be after the inward person and not all the, just the excessive array. Same thing, 1 Timothy chapter 2, modesty, and what that just means is orderly. So it's not the idea of seeking undue attention. So when we say that we're Christians and we're peculiar and we're different, look, it's the ideas, it's the principles, they're otherworldly, right? You get that, otherworldly? We don't have to go out of our way to start being weird. And it's worldly things what people be weird on. When he said in 1 Corinthians 9:22, whether it's Jews, Gentiles, the weak, the strong, he says, I made all things to all men that I might by all means save some. Paul's saying I can fit in with just about anybody. And when I get in, I'm talking Bible with just about everybody. That's the point that he's making here. So as we talk about different, and I'm saying you've already obeyed the gospel, you've been added to the Lord's church, could there be more that we could be doing? Other world mindedness. It's not a bad thing to see things differently. I think everybody knows this quote, and I would say probably everybody likes this quote. Bobby Kennedy said, there are those who look at things the way that they are and ask why. I dream of things that never were and ask why not. You're looking at things differently. The whole thing that Charles liked about Dad came to see the movie at Hollywood, My Brother's Crossing, And Dad watched the movie, and it's supposed to be a movie about forgiveness, the car accident, right? And Dad said, I don't know why we were talking about forgiveness. It's a car accident. Nobody's at fault. If there's no fault, you don't have to forgive anybody. And then when all that was done, Charles said, man, Johnny, I love the way you look at things. He said, nobody has said that coming out of that movie. Just, why do we have to forgive this guy in the first place? We look at things and we see it differently. And because you see it differently, people say, well, that's weird. Why? Because the multitude doesn't see it that way. Well, maybe y'all are just wrong. We've been doing things for a certain way for however long. Well, maybe that's the old and bad way of doing things. Maybe there's a better way to approach this. He says they look at things that are and ask why. I dream of things that never were and ask why not. Now here's a second point, being weird. It's okay to be dissatisfied. It's okay to want better things. Now, I am going to have to say, I think the King James is fantastic, but in his time frame, this is Alexander Campbell, and look what people were saying about Alexander Campbell. They said, that man is never satisfied. God Almighty could not satisfy him with the Bible, which he gave the world, and Mr. Campbell had to go and write a new one of his own. That's not really how that happened. Alexander Campbell just thought, well, maybe we can improve on some of the Greek words that the King James maybe didn't do a good job on. So he made his own translation. He didn't rewrite the Bible. To a degree, Mr. Randolph was correct. Throughout his long life, Alexander Campbell was never satisfied with anything less than the whole truth, an uncompromising, unyielding protagonist on the stage of human history for the right as he saw it. What's wrong with that? I don't like the way that things are. Can I say this to you? You know what? If you don't like the way that things are and you want to go about to change it, do it. But here's the thing. He did it on his own. You don't have to basically start enlisting people to say, well, I want these folk to change how things are. If you really don't like it, do something about it. And that's okay. To say, I don't want to go along with status quo. Now here's another one. This is a quote from Marshall Keeble. Marshall Keeble, I have no clue how many people that he was influential or played a part in them obeying the gospel. But he said, preachers need to preach the truth and bear down on it. We don't need to make friends, we need to save souls. And here's my thing to Marshall Keeble. In the time frame where he was, some white people would let him preach to them, but at the same time they did not like him. And then, because Marshall Keeble actually would use the word or the phrase, he would say otherworld mindedness, and he was talking about eternal life. There were a lot of black people who didn't like Marshall Keeble either, because they felt that he wasn't on cue with the idea of the civil rights, and it was a little bit early for the civil rights at that time. But his idea was, maybe I can't do anything about that right now, but I can teach people the truth. But his idea, I tell you what he did do. Somebody brought their wife to a tent meeting that he was teaching one night, and they said, Brother Keeble, my wife is here, and she's a Methodist, so take it easy on the Methodists. And he said, I hear you. He got up, gets ready to preach under the tent, and he said, we're so glad to see Miss So-and-so, that's Brother So-and-so's wife, and she's a Methodist. Thank you for being here. Tonight we're going to talk about the Methodists. And he just dug into it, and you know what? That woman obeyed the gospel. I think he did a lot, man. And he did it by being other-world-mindedness. Now let's look at this last point, and I'm saying about adjusting our thinking. Do you think about these people and how they got to be where they were going to be? I was talking to Dad earlier, and I said, we can try our hardest to motivate people, but in some sense, if they're not going to be a self-starter, I don't know if there's anything we can do for them. And would you disagree with that? I mean, you had the truth. It was presented to you. Who was kicking you, right? Nobody put a gun to your head. You were a self-starter, and that you said, this is the truth, and I'm going to obey it, regardless of what anybody else does. But as I ask about these people who became these big images in front of us, they had to have like a self-spark and a get up and go, and that actually takes some sacrifices. So you all know the idea that's a hearse pulling a U-Haul. And all the things about people want to go to heaven, they just don't want to go right now. And then another country song says, I never saw a hearse pulling a U-Haul. But here's a little anecdote for you tonight as we talk about this. Other-world-mindedness. So, always coming up, Ian and I always have this discussion about who is actually the richest person in the world when we use these illustrations. The richest person in the world dies. And he goes to whatever the last scene looks like. He's going to have his judgment, and he's probably going to go into heaven. And he goes to the gate. He comes to, this is an illustration. He goes to the gate, talks to the angel. They said, what's your name? He tells the name. And they said, okay, you're good to go. And he said, well, wait a minute. He said, you know who I am? They said, yeah, we know who you are. He said, you know I'm the richest man on the planet? We know that. We know who you are. He said, here's the thing. I got a bunch of stuff down there. And my kids are idiots. I can't leave that to my kids. And the people that I work with, they already stole a whole bunch from my company. I cannot leave any more to them. What do you want us to do? He says, I want to go back and I want to get some of my most prized possessions. I want to bring them up here. And they say, we're really not allowed to bring suitcases in here. He said, I know it, I hear you, but I just need to make this one exception. They said, you got 24 hours. So they send him back to earth. He fills up a briefcase and he comes back to the gate. He checks it in. The angel looks in it, looks back at him and says, is this a joke? He says, no, man, it's the most valuable possessions that I got. And the angel looks back at him and says, you brought pavement up here? He had filled his briefcase with gold. And Revelation 21 says, and the street of the city was pure gold. Your perspective, what's worth something to you is worthless to other people. Now here's where I want to make a turn. This is just an illustration about other world mindedness, spiritual mindedness. I said on the class today, morning broadcast, I try not to take things personally, and when people try to upset me and they try to hurt me and do me wrong, I try to put it in an aspect of what is the momentary discomfort that you could cause me when I compare it to the length of eternity. There is no length to eternity. But there's a link to what I'm doing right now. It's very, very minuscule compared to eternity. Now let's talk about this. People who did the things like Alexander Campbell, Marshall Keeble, and, there's a lot of things to be said about Bobby Kennedy. If you look at some of the things that he did for I can't remember if it was Brooklyn or the Bronx when he was a senator in New York, but just the movement to get things done. This is what I would like to talk to you about. The idea, otherworld mindedness, is you say you're dissatisfied. Well, change things. But you got to change them. You say, I'd like to do more. Then you're going to have to figure out a way for yourself for you to really do more. It usually does not, I will tell you this, it does not work out where somebody says to me, Caleb, I would like to do something, but I need you to help me figure out what I'd like to do. I can't do that. I don't know what all your skills are. I don't know what your different abilities and possibilities are. You're going to have to do some self-examination and figure that out. And we look at people who have done it in the past. They say, these are my skill sets and I know what I can do with them. I was talking to Dad earlier today. I read a biography of a preacher, and one thing that he did, here's the thing. You say, well, I haven't had any formal education. Neither did this man. And what he would do was he would work in the spring, summer, and into the fall, and he would help people build houses. And he was raising like 4 or 5 boys. Spring, summer, fall, he would work building houses, and he'd take in the winter time, and he would big time pour into his studies, and he'd write. Influence, a number of people. You could do things like that. I can remember different times people talking about finding different jobs that maybe were attached to the school system, and they said, this will free up some of my time, and I'll be able to be involved more. Whatever it might be, we're going to have to make up these decisions. Now let's look at this. Let's make a turn off that. I want to really emphasize a point here. I had to use this text for illustration purposes. This text is not talking about getting you ready to go to heaven. In Revelation 21:21, he says, in the beginning of the chapter, I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and first earth were passed away, and there was no more sea. And I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven. Now, in the vision, we say this every time we look at this, you don't have heaven coming out of heaven. What do you have? He said, I saw the New Jerusalem coming down from God out of heaven and prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. What is the consistent theme of the New Testament text as far as bride and groom? Christ and His church. And I heard a great voice out of heaven saying, behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and He will dwell with them, and they shall be His people, and God Himself shall be with them and be their God. Now you put it with Hebrews 12:22 and 23. You are come unto Mount Zion, unto a city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, to an innumerable company of angels, to the general assembly and the church of the firstborn. Now we're making a turn, but I want to talk about other world mindedness. Galatians 4:25 and 26, he makes a comparison. There's physical Israel, there's spiritual Israel, which is the church. He said, for this Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia, and answers to Jerusalem, which now is, and is in bondage with her children. But Jerusalem, which is above, is free, which is the mother of us all. He's making a comparison of the two. I had to use Revelation 21 for just that illustration, but I wanted to make sure we know it's talking about the church that you are a member of. Now let's do this. Do you want to know why I'm doing this tonight? I was talking to Joey the other day, and this was his response. I had a lady who has known us for a very long time, and she asked me, she said, Caleb, if they make a vaccine for coronavirus, are you going to take it? And I said, no. And she said, I don't do anything. They offered me a tetanus shot the other day and a flu shot, and I said, no, thank you. I'm not going to do it. So she said, I'm not going to do it either. And I said, okay. And then she said, let me ask you this. Do you think that that's going to be the mark of the beast? And I said, a vaccine? And she said, well, they're talking about if they give you the vaccine, they're also talking about putting a chip in you. And she said, I think that chip is going to be the mark of the beast. Now, I told Joey that, and he knows this lady, and he said, after all this time of knowing us, she thought that you would think all that? I don't know, but let's look at this. Here's what I'm really saying is, as people start talking about that stuff, that's a door of opportunity, right? People start talking about, this might be the end. What if it is? You're not ready. And you talk about this is the end. You ain't been building up to it, that's for sure. But I would like for us to think about this. You could maybe work it another way, and I would prefer that we work it this way. That lady, and I was fixing to do TV, so it wasn't like I was going on live in 10 minutes. I couldn't just talk with that person. What you could say to them is, they said, I think that's the mark of the beast, and all these are the signs of the time. You know what you could do? You could ask them, you could say, if you're talking about John's revelation, how is it the case that at the beginning of the book he said the things were about to happen, and here we are 2020 years later, and you're still talking about us getting the mark of the beast? John said, the things which must shortly come to pass. In verse number 3, he said, the time is at hand. And when you get to and some people would say, well, the stuff that he saw at the beginning, early on, that was at hand. Well, you get to the end of the book in Revelation 22:10, he's still saying the same thing. The time's at hand. And it's not like, he's getting a vision. It's not like God can't tell what's soon and what's far off, because when Daniel had a vision in Daniel 8:26 about Greece, the vision was said to him, the vision in the evening and the morning which was told is true. He says, wherefore shut thou up the vision, for it shall be for many days. God knows what things are distant, and we're 2,000 years away from John's revelation. That was distant. But John said it's about to happen. You could ask somebody that. How'd you get this idea that you're about to get the mark of the beast in a vaccine when John said it was close and at hand? Well, they don't know what they're not going to have a clue what to say to that. And what you get to say is, if you've been thinking incorrectly on that, what else could you be thinking incorrectly on? Let's look at this. Revelation's purpose is to get all of us ready to just be willing to suffer for the cause. In Revelation 7:14, he said, I said unto him, Sir, thou knowest. And he said to me, These are they which came out of great tribulation, and have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. Now you compare it to Matthew 24:21, where he said these things would happen in this generation. Then shall be a great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. And you got another point with these folk. John said it was at hand. Jesus said it was going to be in their generation. If you've been taught wrong on that, what else are you guys being taught wrong on? But we should be ready to endure through all these tribulations. Revelation 3:10, somebody would say, I'm making the case, if you didn't notice, that it's about the destruction of Jerusalem in the first century. And somebody would say, the 7 churches of Asia at the beginning of the book of Revelation. Someone would say, what does the destruction of Jerusalem have to do with 7 churches in Asia Minor? When you go to Revelation 3:10, he says, Because thou hast kept the word of my patience, I also will keep thee from the hour of temptation, which shall come upon all the world, to try them that dwell upon the earth. You have these just tucked away, these ideas, and I'm saying, y'all, if you can get, Joey's got a pretty thin Bible that he keeps on him. If you can get a Bible that you've got notes in, and you get these good notes going, then you don't have to worry about having conversations with these folk. And you're helping them. And as we look at these texts and we're getting otherworld mindedness, we should be getting ourselves ready, because he said in Revelation 14:12, Here is the patience of the saints. Here are they that keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. And I heard a voice from heaven saying unto me, Right, blessed are the dead which die in the Lord from henceforth. Yea, saith the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors, and their works do follow them. I would hope, And I think that we had the idea, and she's not here tonight, but if you remember when all this business got going, where we said we didn't know if we were going to be ticketed just for showing up to Bible class. And Anna Sparks said, well, if we all go to jail together, then that won't be so bad. And I don't know if I've told you this story or not. It's in a book that I read. A member of the church was arrested in the 1950s for disturbing the peace. He was voicing his disagreement at a public forum. They arrested him. They took him to jail, and he's sitting in jail with this other guy, and he said, well, this isn't so bad. And the other guy said, it's not bad now, but when they bring so-and-so in, he's a town drunk, and he will beat both of us up. It will get bad. But if we're all in there, it's not so bad. Hopefully. But we're getting ourselves ready with these ideas because we read these texts. These people, he says, this is the patience of the saints. What is it? They know that if they do die for the cause, they are certain. Here we are. Still, I'm saying, y'all, I don't know, people that are still talking to Dad about they haven't gone back. They don't know what. They said, we don't know what normal is going to look like. Can you say that you feel good about this, that you guys at least still have normal? Man, some of these people don't even have like their normal. I get to come in the building and sit down. You still got your normal. You should be thankful for that. I am. Where it all begins. Tribulation, patience, endurance, coming through all of it. Look at this. Here's why I would say talking to these people. Man, y'all got all, I'm saying talking to your friends, whoever brings this type of stuff up to you because of the times, and you say, you know, in the book of Revelation, didn't any of it matter if you weren't in the kingdom? And your neighbor's not even going to think that the kingdom is here. I, John, who also am your brother and companion in tribulation and in the kingdom and patience of Jesus Christ, was in the isle that's called Patmos for the word of God and for the testimony of Jesus Christ. The tribulation was already happening. What you and I are involved in, is it bad? People have gotten sick. People have died. People had to file for unemployment. Some people have just totally lost their businesses. It has been bad. This is not the tribulation. They were already in their tribulation, and he said, I'm in the kingdom with you all. How to enter the kingdom. Now, see how this went? You take somebody talking to you about the mark of the beast through a vaccine, and you work it down this way, and you bring them in, you say, well, none of the revelation matters to anybody outside the kingdom. Revelation 1:5. And from Jesus Christ, who is the faithful witness, and the first begotten of the dead, and the prince of the kings of the earth, unto him that loved us, and washed us from our sins in his own blood. Verse 5, then verse 9. I'm your brother and companion in the tribulation and in the kingdom. Then you bring it right in. John wrote Revelation, and John documented John 3:5 for us, where Jesus said, except a man be born of water and spirit, he cannot enter the kingdom of God. Now, you just basically whittle it on down from whatever talking point they give you, and it is that easy. Now, a lot of people would say, and I would say this too, Ian and I were having Bible study with people in Danville, and they want to talk about the Revelation. They don't know anything about the Revelation, so why do it? Let's bring it back to the non-apocalyptic, not signified book in the New Testament. But if they're just bound and determined, you can do it. And you can work it right down to this and then show them. You say it's the end. You say you're fixing to get a vaccine that's got a chip in it. You ain't ready if you're not in the kingdom. And I will say this tonight as we finish. All this is done with the idea of being otherworldly minded. We're not dismayed by the things that are around us. We see these things as opportunities for the spreading of the kingdom, opportunity to talk to more people or revisit people. And then also, as we look at their tribulation, I said this to Ian about people who think we're weird. Y'all have got a membership board. We have a members board in Danville. And people say, boy, y'all are aggressive and y'all are outspoken, and I just don't know about this. First century, right? I said to Ian, what would people do if they came in and they saw the board and they saw a picture of somebody and they say, I have not seen them. Who is that? And then we had to say, well, that's brother so-and-so, and about 2 months ago the city killed them. You would big time be weird, but that's first century. And that's the tribulation. So where we are right now, y'all, things are not bad for us. Like I said, you still have your normal. Now the question needs to become, is everybody here taking advantage of our normal? To be involved in Bible study, to be outspoken, to still use the rights that we have to talk to people about the Bible? I sure hope so. And I hope that as we go home tonight, we can, like I said, I can't make decisions for people, and I oftentimes can't find exactly where to plug different people in. So I would hope tonight that you would go home and as a continuous fashion think about ways that we can make ourselves be able to stretch out more for the kingdom. Tonight, let's think about all these things as Joey leads us in this closing song.